Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great day out there. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. What I wanted to do today is get to some of these interviews that I did. I know before my internet went down and my computer burned up and everything, I had told you guys that I had these interviews lined up. So the one I would like to share with you today is the interview that I did with Jerry Marzinsky. He's an expert in schizophrenia. He has over 40 years, think about that, over 40 years experience working with the criminally insane, working in not just in mental hospitals, but also in the prison system. So his life experience is so very valuable to us. How many of us would have access to sit down with people who are actually dealing with these voices in their heads and interview them on a daily basis? But that is Jerry's life experience. He knows better than us. It's one thing to be an armchair quarterback, but it's another thing to actually be in there counseling these people and to be able to understand what they are really experiencing and what schizophrenia really is. And after decades and decades of experience in this mental health field, Jerry Marzinsky came to the conclusion that everything he had been taught in his secular pharmaceutical establishment was absolutely incorrect. And when he challenged the establishment, he faced the same sort of resistance that we saw with the frontline doctors who came up with treatments for COVID, this set of symptoms that they're calling COVID. The establishment didn't want them to cure people. In fact, we saw that the establishment went out of their way to make sure that people weren't being cured, that they were limiting access to the treatments that worked, and mandatorily forcing people to take drugs and treatments, experimental treatments that now we see are proven not to work. So this was the same exact thing that Mr. Marzinsky experienced in the mental health profession long before COVID. So the one good thing that has come out of this COVID psyop is that people have woken up to what's going on. We realize now that trust the science, that just because they say it's scientific, there's scientific studies for everything, just because they say it doesn't make it true. And, you know, Jerry was fighting this battle before COVID, so he didn't get as much exposure as I believe he can get now, especially for families who have dealt with schizophrenia or are currently dealing with schizophrenia, because that's Jerry's main point, is that you can successfully get free of this quote-unquote disease. The mainstream narrative is that there is no cure for schizophrenia. It's an absolutely hopeless situation, and you have to be on big pharma drugs your entire life, and basically your life is over. Your entire life will just be, you know, drugged out, subdued, battling these voices. And that was when Jerry encountered the most resistance in his career. And it wasn't a religious thing or anything like that. He just started listening to his patients, and they started to get better. And when the establishment noticed, the places that he worked noticed, why are your patients getting better? Why are they getting off the medication? Why are they, you know, that's impossible. What are you doing? So they started, you know, spying on him and all of this stuff, like he was doing something wrong because his patients were actually getting better. And that is the message of hope here, and the message that Jerry Marzinsky is trying desperately to get out to the world. He also is co-author of a book titled An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. I will put links to that below. I will also put links to a free PDF file of his advice to families and people struggling with schizophrenia, different treatments, free PDF file, and I'll put the link to his website, which is jerrymarzinsky.com. Okay, beyond just Jerry's research, for people who have followed my research and my channel, I want to read this little book synopsis here, and you'll know why it's important that we listen to Jerry's life experience and his medical experience. Because although we've all come from completely different perspectives coming at this thing, coming toward the truth, you can see that he's come to basically the same conclusion that we have come to. So here's the back of the book write-up. Psychiatry maintains the voices schizophrenics hear are meaningless auditory hallucinations caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Actual clinical investigation into the matter reveals this to be a false claim. Dr. Wilson Van Dusen, a clinical psychologist and author of The Presence of Spirits in Madness, began holding coherent conversations with the voices of his schizophrenic patients decades ago. He discovered they precisely matched what Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg described as quote-unquote evil spirits. Following up with scores of investigative interviews with his own schizophrenic patients, Jerry Marzinsky verified Van Dusen's astonishing conclusion. The voices are real. They are conscious. They are parasitic entities. So those of you who have watched my channel and everything that we've been talking about this last couple years about these parasites, these nanoparasites, these neural links into the brain, you can see why I think it's so important that we have medical verification from the psychiatric community for what we are saying. Okay, so let's get to it. Please overlook the fact that I have terrible slow internet and this interview is going to have some places where it blurs out. You know how it goes. This was actually the very last interview I did before my computer burned up. And then my internet completely went out, and I had that several month long battle of trying to get cable run a quarter of a mile out to the, out to the main road and all of that to get internet again. So like I told Jerry, it's just the price I pay for living in paradise. I chose this place out here in the rural area and back in the woods because I don't want to be in the city around 5G towers and all of that. So that's the price I pay, is terrible internet, but we did the best we could. All right, without further ado, here's the interview
what was your
with Jerry
awakening
Marzinsky.
To the fact that this isn't a chemical imbalance, that schizophrenia is not a chemical imbalance?
Yeah, it took me a long time to learn that because, in school, it was like 4 years undergraduate, another 4 years of graduate school. That's what they taught. Schizophrenia is a chemical imbalance, and their medicine somehow temporarily balances stuff. So when after I graduated from my master's degree, I went to work at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet. It was in Milledgeville, Georgia. It was like a whole sea of insanity. Everything that you could even imagine, everything in that DSM-5 or 6 it's all there. So when I first hit abnormal psychology, I just was fascinated. Just absolutely fascinated. But all they were doing were describing these illnesses. They didn't have any cause. They didn't have any cure. They didn't have anything about what to do about them. That all fell into the province of psychiatry, and they were pushing a chemical imbalance for all mental illnesses. And one of the most troublesome where I was working in a psychiatric rehabilitation center. It was called the Yarborough Rehabilitation Center at the time in the state of Georgia. So what that whole center was about was trying to get psychiatrically disabled people on their feet and working, and holding down a job. So trying to get them out of the mental hospitals, out working so they could take care of themselves. But what I found was that all the schizophrenics who seemed to have a lot of the potential would at one point start going off their medications. So they'd be released. They had to stay working for 6 months in order to be considered a successful client. And they just couldn't stay on those medications. So it was like, why? I mean, it was like all of a sudden they would at some point just decide to go off those meds. But, you know, it was kind of understandable because the side effects were so awful. So their choice was, you know, side effects or insanity.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. That's what I think is the most important part of your work, is that it's so refreshing to see somebody who says there is an answer, there is a cure, there is a, you know, something that you can do, you can recover. They've almost made it illegal. Well, they have made it illegal in some places to even use the word cure.
Well, so, then they can talk to some of my clients, for crying out loud. You know, the ones that were cured in the prison, I was put under investigation in the prison because these guys were getting rid of the voices. They were going off their medications. They were completely normal. And according to psychiatry and psychology, that shouldn't ever happen. They said, they were saying that this was a lifelong illness. So when these guys started recovering, they were like, what's he doing? What's he doing? And, you know, I couldn't tell him because it's what I was doing it wasn't even in their universe. It wasn't even there, you know, and nor would they believe in it. But here are these guys, we're getting rid of the voices little by little until one day they're clear and they go off their meds, and then they got suspicious. So the chief psychologist sent over this other psychologist to investigate. What is he doing? So he behind my back, he started asking all these patients, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? And they were sharp enough to know that, you know, they were fishing, and that if they told, I would be in a lot of trouble. So they didn't tell them anything. So that frustrated.
How backwards is that? Instead of getting a Nobel Prize, you get put on investigation if you find the cure to schizophrenia.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
no lie.
That's why I was asking you earlier, what year? I mean, what a pioneer as far as bucking the system. Now with the COVID thing, we're seeing all of these doctors, they're threatening to take their license if they have treatments that work. And you were in that situation years before it was known to the masses that there was a medical mafia.
Yeah, well, it was the chief psychologist who was going after me, you know, because these guys were recovering, and I thought that was great because they didn't have to give them those expensive meds and they didn't have to destroy their nervous systems. But next thing you know, here they are snooping around. What are you doing in your sessions? What's he saying? What's he talking about? You know, and none of them told them anything. Thank you. I was protected by a bunch of schizophrenics, a bunch of people who were considered lunatic, and it's the greatest honor I've ever had. Seriously. So there was one guy who completely recovered, and they really went after him. So they pinned him down, and they started badgering him, and asking him, what's he doing in there? What are you doing in there with these sessions? Because I would stay in there for long periods of time, sometimes as long as 4 hours, where the normal psych people, they would blow out of there in 20 minutes. They didn't understand anything about these guys. They didn't want to understand anything about them. They thought there was nuts. There was nothing that could be done except drug them up, which is what psychiatry wanted them to do. And I was asking questions about what their voices were telling them, and, you know, looking for patterns, and there were patterns. So this one fella who completely recovered, when the investigating psychologist asked him, what is he doing in there? What are you doing? What are they saying? He said, he's helping us, not like you, asshole. And that was like, he could have gone all day without saying that. It was like, that was like, that just poured gas on the fire, you know. So this guy reared back, and he's looking at the guy, and he goes, well, we have an MMPI on you. At the time you entered the prison, it was a valid MMPI. It said you were psychotic. Would you be willing to take another one? And the guy said, sure, I would. You know, so he gave it to him, and it turned out to be a valid profile. And the guy was no longer considered psychotic based on the results of his MMPI, which is the gold standard as far as psychologists are concerned about measuring personality traits. So he came out as non-psychotic. He didn't act not as psychotic, and they went nuts on that. You know, it's like, he's doing something. He's doing something. and he's doing something without departmental permission. Well, yeah. If I would ask the department if I could have, can I investigate schizophrenia? Oh, hell no, that's not your province. What do you think you are? No. Matter of fact,
you're doing your job though. Listening to people that's the shocking part when you say 20 minutes in and 20 out. And that's what I've seen with we were talking about the books, that their diagnosis is like, look up the diagnosis and then the options are this drug, this drug, this drug, this drug. They're like used car salesmen. They're drug dealers.
Well, they
Big
are.
Pharma.
They're
and they just give them a catalog and they're like, here, choose from the catalog, give them that, get them out. And then all of a sudden how profound, ask the people, what is it that the voices are saying? You actually started counseling and listening, and that's wrong in the eyes of
it blew my mind that none of them, when I got to the state hospital, I would ask all the staff, all the professional staff, what causes schizophrenia? What are the voices? What are they saying? And they weren't the least bit curious, and I'd ask them, well, why did they go off their medications and go crazy? And they go, well, that's just a symptom of schizophrenia. That's just what they do. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking like, what do you mean that's just what they do? They go off their meds and they go insane, and that's just what they do? Why do they do it? So the logical answer is the side effects suck. They're really bad. Your nervous system is actually being destroyed. I got to list the side effects here. I could read them off to you. Take 20 minutes. Blurred vision, sexual dysfunction, nervous irritability, jitteriness, feeling agitated and dumbed down at the same time. Can't think straight. It's like a fog on your brain. It's awful stuff.
It's actually very similar to the neurological problems that we're seeing with these, what they're calling vaccines, these injections that are just destroying people's neurological system.
Yeah.
Same thing with brain fog and spasms and everything.
Yeah, these are neurotoxins also. Mm-hmm. They're just slower. So some of the more modern neuroleptics that they call atypicals, they have less side effects, but they still do the damage. They still rot out your nervous system. They still shrink your brain. So what they started doing was autopsies on schizophrenics, and they found out that all their brains were shrunk. So they published this, some of the reputable researchers, and when it hit the journals, the deep state, big pharma psychiatric mafia went nuts. Oh, no, it's not the meds that are doing that. It's the schizophrenia that's shrinking their brains.
Did they have a control group where they could see schizophrenics who had never taken, any of the psychological medications?
Yeah, they did that. And they also did it with rats and mice. And they found that the rats and the mice that were taking those neuroleptics also had shrunken brains. So here's big pharma and the psychiatric mafia just, oh no, it can't be. So they proved it was, and then they started getting worried about lawsuits because they know that it's destroying people's brains, and they give it anyway. Matter of fact, at the state hospital, what they were doing was they were giving them, when they started showing neurologic symptoms of their nervous systems being wrecked, they would douse them down with cogentin that would mask those effects so they couldn't feel them, but the destructive process still continued underneath that masking. That's what they did.
Yeah, that's what they're doing all across the board, like we see with the myocarditis and stuff with the injections. Yeah. So when they give these injections to the younger people, now they've added, the chemical to the injections to keep the kids from having heart failure, like right there. And that's, they're like, if we can mask it and pretend that we're not causing this, that's good enough. But that's the sad thing is it almost, at what point did you start to look at your colleagues, not just with disrespect, but that it's a crime against humanity, that it's criminal, that they're harming. I mean, they're supposed to take an oath not to harm patients. And we're seeing this in the hospitals, with the remdesivir and everything that's going on now. Yeah. They don't care. They're just like, like you
They're
said,
after
they're like,
money.
oh, they had multi-organ failure. They came in and they had oxygen at like 93, and then I
Yeah.
started loading them up with all these IVs and injections and stuff every day, and then all their organs failed. And they don't care. They're like, we did it by the book.
Right. They want the money. That's what they're after, is the money. They don't care whether people recover. You know, they, it's just they're pill pushers.
Yeah,
You
no
know,
more
and
Florence Nightingales, I guess.
yeah, and NIMH is behind this to the max. You know,
Oh, yeah.
they reduced the number of schizophrenics by manipulating their statistics from 2.8 million in the United States to 750,000 to make it look like they were spending more money on research. And they didn't count the people in nursing homes. They didn't count the people in mental health clinics. They didn't count the people on the streets. Their sample was so biased, it was incredible. And so it made it look like, oh yeah, we're spending millions and millions of dollars on schizophrenic research when they're spending virtually nothing.
Well,
They don't want a cure.
yeah, and now's your time, brother, because people can hear you now. When you were saying this before years ago, I think a lot of people, they wanted to trust the system. They're like, oh, they're not manipulating the numbers and the statistics, and they're not, doing all this. But going through what we've gone through in the last 2 years with the COVID and then the mandatory injections and stuff, a lot of people are waking up, and the masses know now they are manipulating the data. They absolutely are. So, I mean, you should be well received now. This is your era.
Well, I hope so, because psychiatry's been doing this for a long, long time.
Have you seen any progress amongst any of your colleagues, or are you not? I know you're doing a lot of interviews and stuff now, but are any of those with other, people with your degrees and your experience? And
For the most part, the more educated they are, the more brainwashed they are.
that I believe that. That's absolutely true.
And it took me years to overcome my programming. And the only reason I did it is because what they taught me wasn't making sense in terms of what I was actually seeing with my own eyes.
Yeah, I wonder what made you, like you said, because you didn't start out, you weren't, really religious or new agey.
No.
You didn't come out, you came at this straight secular like everybody else. I wonder what it was that clicked in your mind that made you say, okay, if this is a chemical imbalance, show me the documents of what chemical, what is the imbalance? Like, where is the science? Just show me the science. Like, why only you? Out of all of these professionals?
Well, I don't know. It was like it was a lonely place, I'll tell you that, because I could not talk about any of this to any of them. So I asked them a lot of questions, and I said, well, I asked one psychiatrist, well, how do you know it's a chemical imbalance? Oh, well, the drug companies, they do all the research. And I'm thinking, the drug companies, that's like letting a fox loose in the hen house. What do you mean the drug? It's like, what are you talking? Oh yeah, they come and they do these presentations and they do all these screens and computer graphics and all these graphs and big words and stuff. And it's a chemical imbalance. We'd learn that from their, So what the pharmaceutical agents would do, they'd get all these pretty gals and they'd send them to the state hospital, and it was great fun. I mean, when we heard the pharmacist guys were coming to give a demonstration, we were all there because they had Subways and Cokes and cake and all kinds of stuff, and it was all free. All you had to do was sit there and listen to their dribble. And at the end, I would ask them questions, and I said, well, how do you know this? How do you know this? This is to the drug representatives. Mm-hmm. And one of them admitted, well, we don't. We don't. What we have is correlations. Correlations? I mean, you could say that every schizophrenic that ever lived drank milk, and milk is there's a one-to-one correlation. It's milk. Stop them from drinking milk.
Can you hear me? Because you're fading out. You're kind of glitching in and out on this end.
Yeah, I can hear you. that was well after, I was back at the state hospital. I was just still trying to figure out what the voices were and what they were saying. And the 2 times that psychiatrists found out that I was asking these patients questions about what their voices were saying, I ended up in front of the medical director's desk being told the voices are hallucinations, and you asking questions about them only is reinforcing them and making them stronger. So you're making these people worse. And I'm like, I am? I'd been doing it for a good while before they caught me, and they were getting better. They were actually, telling me stuff. But the voices themselves, it took a while to figure out how to talk to them because they're very suspicious. They don't call them paranoid schizophrenics for nothing.
Right.
And, the counseling staff were more or less spies for psychiatry. So they kept an eye on, psychotic behavior. Is the guy going off the deep end, or what's he behaving? So we were kind of like, spies. And if somebody starts decompensating, you take them to the psychiatrist and, report them, and they increase their meds until they couldn't see straight. So they didn't trust any of the psych staff. So that was something that had to be overcome. And that was even more difficult in the prison, to get prisoners to trust you. But yeah, it took a while to learn how to talk to them about the voices. And what I found is that piece by piece, as soon as one guy told me something about the voices that I had no idea of, and it was something new, the next patient that would come in, I'd say, well, tell me about your voices. This is what I know. And I know this, I know they're negative. I know you can't believe anything they say. I know they're liars. They always negative stuff. They run certain patterns. And that kind of opened them up because nobody else on the psych staff knew that kind of stuff. So they're going, at one point I had one of them ask me, are you crazy too? How do you know this stuff?
Yeah.
But it took years and years. It took 7 years before I figured out why they were going off their meds. And one experiment I did, I had to know this, and I'm like, okay, why are they doing this? Okay, and then I started asking them. I'd go, what's worse? Is it worse being psychotic? Totally psychotic, where you're seeing demons coming out of the walls and shadows coming into your room and people appearing trying to murder you and shadow people and all these horrible things, or the side effects, which is worse? So what I did is I got 2 pages of side effects, and had like check marks near them. And first I gave him a blank sheet of paper and I said, okay, write down all the side effects that you've had from the medications you're taking. And they did. They had 5 or 6 of them. They weren't good. Not all of them have the same side effects. So then I gave them the 2 pages with the listing of all the psychiatric symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. And I said, check here every one of these that you've had. And after they were done, I looked at them both and I handed them back to him and I said, which one's worst? And they said, the psychiatric symptoms. The being psychotic is worse. And then I'd ask them, then why do you keep going off your medications? And you know what they said?
What?
They said, I don't know. Every single one of them. I don't know. That went on for 3.5 to 4 years. I felt like a crazy guy myself, asking the same question over and over and over again and getting the same answer.
Well, was it the voices, and they just weren't telling you? Because a lot of people, like you said, I think a lot more people experience it, and I think all of us on some level, that sort of little devil on one shoulder and little angel on the other side.
That's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, that we all are being influenced by intrusive thoughts continually, but especially people who are plagued by it. And suicide is so high right now, and we've got the whole transgender issue where people are being told by something inside them to become it, and to self-mutilate, you know, to cut body parts off and stuff. And which is ironic that they were telling you, don't ask what the voices are saying or the intrusive thoughts are saying to these people. And nowadays they're like, oh, if you have an intrusive thought that tells you to cut your penis off, then indulge it, you know. It's a crime not to indulge that thought. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's so agenda driven.
Well, I did have one patient who did that on another unit that one of my friends was working on. At dinner, we were sitting down at dinner. I said, Ed, did you ask him? He goes, yeah, he told me. I said, well, what did he say? He said, I don't need it anymore. I went, okay. Like, but you know, it took me 7 years to figure out why they were doing that. And some of the clues I had to start with is that when I got to the state hospital, the psychiatrists were getting beat up by schizophrenic patients at an abnormally high rate. You know, back then we didn't have cell phones. We just had the dial-up ones. You know, you didn't have any radio phones. So the central kitchen for the hospital was like the, what do you call it, the grapevine. And you know, there was always a psychiatrist getting the crap kicked out of him by one of the psychotic patients. And I'm like, nobody else was getting beat up. Psychologists weren't getting beat up. Psych nurses weren't getting beat up. Counselors weren't getting beat up. Recreational people weren't getting beat up. You know, why was it psychiatrists? And they only spent like 20 minutes with them. And I'm like, what are they doing to piss these people where they're physically attacked in 20 minutes?
What was it?
Well, what it turned out to be 7 years later, there was one gal who, what we did at the rehab centers, we give them 3 chances. And if they went off their meds 3 times, we would discharge them from the program, because the only way they could stay sane that we knew about at the time was to stay on their meds. So if they didn't stay on their meds and they went off 3 times, we would actually discharge them from the program. So there was this one girl who was in the cosmetology class about to graduate. She was doing real good. She went off for the 3rd time, and we were about to discharge her, and her mother called me, and she was desperate. She goes, I can't deal with her. I mean, she's been here before. I can't deal with her. I'll come up there. We'll talk her into it. I'll do whatever I need to do. We'll find out why she went off her meds. We'll get them back on. You know, I'm 100% behind. You can't discharge her, because I know what's going to happen. I can't handle her. So I said, okay, all right, come on up here. And she drove like 3 hours to get here from South Georgia, from where I was. So one Friday afternoon, we all met and brought the girl in, brought her mother in, and they both sat down, and you know, we looked at her and we go, listen, you're about to be discharged. You went off your meds the 3rd time. Why did you do that? You know, and she just looked, staring at her feet, and her mom started begging her, yeah, why did you do that? You know you were going to get thrown out. You did it two times before. Tell us why. What happened? You know, so both of us are imploring her, why did you do that? You were about to succeed. And that was another thing I saw. When they're just about to succeed, they go off their meds, and the voices come back. So it was like they couldn't stand success.
Yeah, sabotage, self-sabotaging, right.
Yeah. So finally she said, well, you won't believe me. And I told her, I said, I've seen some pretty weird things since I've been here. You know, I doubt seriously you're going to be able to throw anything at me that's going to surprise me. So she goes, the voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And the side effects, they said, were proof that he was poisoning me. And indeed, she was being poisoned by those medications. And the voices were telling her that she was being poisoned by those medications. So yeah, I have the patterns here. So that was another thing here that, you know, here's psychiatry insisting that the voices are hallucinations. If they're hallucinations, they're random. You know, I've been around hallucinations. I've worked on psych wards. I've worked in ERs. I've been around people hallucinating on drugs. Those hallucinations are random. They don't follow patterns. You never can predict what's going to happen with those, you know. But when you start looking at what the voices are actually saying and doing, after studying the voices for years and years and years, they are constantly negative. They don't say anything positive. So the question that has to be asked is, what is it that holds them to a constantly negative pattern? Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why is the content always negative? Why isn't it sometimes neutral? Why isn't it sometimes positive? Why isn't it sometimes just nonsensical? Why is it always negative? What holds it to that particular pattern? And you know, I remembered there was a war movie once. It was like I think it was Run Silent, One Deep, where there was a battle with a destroyer, you know, a U-boat and a destroyer, and the destroyer would drop, you know, depth charges on it and beat the crap out of it, and you know, then the submarine would lose them. But the captain noticed that once they lost the submarine would return to a certain course. So once he lost the submarine, he turned back to that course until he picked it up again. So that's what these things are doing. The voices are energetic. Okay, so they're energy, just like your thoughts are energy. You know, you only can see the effects of energy. You can't see itself. So if somebody gave you a strong magnet and said, oh, there's a magnetic field around this thing. It's you know, it's magnetized. There's energy coming out of it. You can't see it. You can't feel it. You can't touch it. It's not amenable to any of your senses. You'll say, well, yeah, I can see the magnetic field. You know, well, how? Well, you put a bunch of iron filings, and then you put it on a bottle, and then you can see the magnetic field. It takes a shape. Well, it's the same thing with the schizophrenic voices. These are energetic. These are thought intrusions, and they're controlled by another entity, not the patient. And that entity wants to generate negative emotional energy, which it feeds off of. And
that's another thing in your writings that I read that was profound, that you said that another pattern was that they almost always, if not always, run contrary to the intentions of the host, of the person.
Yeah, right.
So
that's
it's
one
not
way you
that
tell
they
them
ever
apart.
run parallel. They never agree. They're always working against their own host.
Well, what they try to do is they try to convince the patient that they are them.
Right. Right.
And I've had, I don't know how many patients tell me, you know, I asked the voices what they were, and they said, we are you. We are you.
Right, like the trans agenda. That's what I've been trying to say. They've convinced so many in this generation that when they have these, as you say, energetic parasites, some people say demonic possession. Now, big pharma and the pseudoscientific community have convinced people, though, that the voices are correct, that the voices are them, or that, you know, the intrusive thoughts are them.
Right.
But you're saying in your patterns,
no, they're
in
not.
Your research, all of these years, the people say, no, they run contrary to me. I hate them. They're destroying me. No, they are not me. Well, I can tell the difference.
Yeah, yeah. And, unless they have convinced them that they are them. Now, you know, maybe in an interview down the line, I know the mother of who I've talked to quite extensively. This guy killed 4 people and cut his girlfriend to pieces. The voices had convinced him that he was them. And that's what they did. And I can arrange for her to talk to you at a later time. I can do that. You'd find that interesting.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, they run patterns. They're so the only way you know what they are is by what they do, because they are not physical entities. They are energetic entities. They belong to the energetic universe. They can't be seen. You can't hear them. You can't touch them. You know, they don't belong to the physical universe, but they have an effect on the physical universe. And the effect of the physical universe they have is on people. So like the magnetic filings we were talking about, what the footprint of the voices are is they are consistently negative. They're always negative. They're anti-religious. Why would a hallucination be anti-religious? They don't want the guy going to church. They don't want him reading the Bible. They don't want him talking to preachers. They don't want him going to chapel. They don't want him to anything to do with religion. Why would a hallucination do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Ask any of them. You don't believe me? Find yourself a schizophrenic and ask him.
I have. I worked in an assisted living facility for a while, and I would take I had a couple of clients who were schizophrenic, and I would take a group of them, like say to church on Sunday. And this one, Larry, who was schizophrenic, he used to argue with his voices all the time, in his room. Only he could control them when he was around, us out in the regular common areas. But when he was in his room, I could hear him battling with them.
Yeah.
But when we would go into church, like they would take control of him. He would stand up and scream and growl, talking about, like, he couldn't handle it. He could keep them under control unless, like, we went to church, and they just would not let him sit there.
I saw the same thing, and I investigated that, and what I found was there's 3 different categories with that. So, I found it odd that what the psychiatric mafia says is a hallucination reacts to church in this kind of manner consistently.
Yeah.
So I started talking to schizophrenics about that, and I found out they break it into 3 different groups. If the voices are weak and they go to church, the voices shut up. If the voices are moderate, what happens is they'll go to church and the voices will start yelling at them and making noises and distracting them so they can't listen to what the preacher says. And they start mocking the preacher. Oh, he's stupid. Look at this. You believe that crap? It's that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're very strong, they will actually drive them out of the church. The guy will get up and he will run out of the church. And those findings were consistent. So why would hallucination be anti-religious? Hallucination religious?
No, of course not. And also it lines up biblically with, like, the verse in the Bible. You said the weak ones would flee, and I've heard other testimonies where they flee when people. That testimony I was just listening to that uploaded about 6 hours ago, that you were on. I'm not sure. I can't remember the name. It might have been that George you were talking about, though.
I'm sorry, I want to break into this interview for just a second and show you that clip. The one that I just referenced, this was an interview that Jerry was in on a 3-way conference call that was broadcast 3 months ago, which just happened to be a couple of days before my interview with Jerry. So I will put the link below down in the description box if you want to go and watch this entire interview. But I do want to pop in a clip of this gentleman here who overcame this type of intrusive thoughts and these things even manifesting in his house. I thought his experience was especially interesting, going along with what we've been talking about in my research. So some people will get this and some people won't. We here on my channel have been talking about the material manifestation also of these technologies, these entities, things like that. So I wanted to include this here, and also because I could tell Jerry wasn't exactly sure which clip I was referencing. So I'm just going to put in a couple of minutes of this gentleman's testimony, and then we'll get back to Jerry's interview. And if you remember earlier in this video, at the beginning of this interview, Jerry had mentioned that the manifestation of these shadow entities and stuff like that is a common occurrence in these patients that he has talked to. So I would submit that just as sure as he is that these voices are not auditory hallucinations, I am sure that these demonic manifestations, this sentient mist, the black smoke shadow creature thing, that these are not visual hallucinations, that it's all one and the same thing, and none of it is hallucination. But rather, all of the records left by our ancestors who have warned us for thousands of years that there are other entities in this world with us. I believe this is just more medical evidence to support that.
It out loud. And here I'm witnessing these events and everything. So that temptation stopped, and then they started coming after with other accusations. And it wasn't like they were just attacking me, but they were attacking all of humanity at the same time. And I was acting like a representative against them. The next attack would say things like, oh, you and humans, you're so worthless. Look at your bodies are horrible. You just end up rotting in the grave or being eaten by worms. You stink up if you and smell bad if you don't take a bath or a shower for a while. I mean, just attacking the human form every way they could. And I stood my ground. I started defending myself. And I said, sometimes I was talking out loud when I said this stuff. Other times I was talking in my head back and forth. But I said, look, I said, you're blaming me and humanity for something we have no control of. We didn't make our bodies. It was granted or assigned to us. Take your arguments to God, not to me.
And how'd they react to that?
They backed off almost immediately.
Yeah.
It was almost like they knew they weren't going to win that argument. So then they would take a different approach. They would go into my mind and pull any little sin, and I put sin in quotes there, that I might have done. And a sin to them was like fishing. If you go fishing, you'd hook up live bait onto a hook. I would hook a worm onto it to catch a fish. Oh, they made me feel so guilty for ever doing that. How could you do that? You humans, you're horrible. You kill life. But I remember I was exhausted a lot of times. And even after I got out of the psychiatric hospital, I was still exhausted after these attacks.
So they're psychic vampires in every sense of the term.
Right. That's what they feed off of, negative emotional energy. They can't stand positive energy. So, every time he mentioned God or challenged them with that, they back right off.
Coincidence? I don't know.
No, they don't like the Bible. They hate the 23rd Psalm. It's like burning them with a blowtorch, which is interesting. Why would a hallucination react so negatively to the 23rd Psalm or the Bible?
Just one remark I'd like to say about the Bible. Could that be why, and I'm not particularly religious, I don't belong to any religion basically, haven't been to church for 20 years, but basically, could that explain why there's such a war against Christianity and the Bible at the moment by the mainstream media? It's almost as if there's a war against religion by the mainstream media, even by the alternative media that seem to promote Luciferianism and everything. Is it because of those voices that seem to control not just on an individual level, but on a collective level?
Yes, exactly. Because if you look at the patterns that these voices run, they're exactly what the mainstream media is putting out on the people right now. This poisoning with this vaccine that they planned out, all this negative crap that's coming over the television all the time. It's the same patterns that the voices are running on a macroscopic scale. So there's a huge spiritual war going on right now on this planet.
So finally, I reached a point, I was exhausted from all these battles. This has been going on for most of 1991 after I got out of the psychiatric hospital. I'm thinking, I'm mad, I'm a lunatic, I'm a madman, what's going on? I didn't trust myself anymore. My whole reality and psyche had been gone. It was like my whole ego was being destroyed. My personality was being torn apart. So I started praying to God very intensely. I said, God, give me a sign this isn't madness in my head. I need some proof that this so-called life mission that I think that I'm supposed to do is real, that what I'm battling in my head is real. I woke up about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning with the feeling there was a presence in my room. And I opened my eyes, I looked up, and I saw the square ceiling light on the ceiling. I'm looking at it, and to the left of it, something started to occur. All of a sudden, I saw this like fog or smoke starting to come into the room from just below the level of the ceiling. And at first, I thought it was electrical fire. But I was like, wait a second, that's not how a fire moves. Usually you see some browning or that sort of thing. And this was coming, and it wasn't actually coming out of the ceiling. It was actually coming out from a plane just below the ceiling. And more of the smoke or illuminated fog started to come into the room. And it wasn't stopping. I remember thinking, am I hallucinating? I closed my eyes and I shook my head back and forth to try and stop it, but it continued. And so this fog started filling up the ceiling area above my head. I'm watching it. Part of me is terrified. Part of me is curious. What is this? What's going on here? And then I see this kind of a portal open up, like an oval-shaped dark portal. It was pitch black, but it was in the middle of the cloud, and the clouds were kind of coming out of it, and the cloud and fog were around it. I'm looking at this dark portal. I can't see anything. Then all of a sudden, I see swoosh, this snake-like tail or movement moving from bottom up within the portal. And it looked like it was connected, like it was either two snake tails or a snake-like body that had two vertebrae in it, like parallel tails adjacent to each other. And it went up, and it was kind of grayish on the bottom, and it had kind of black, and it was scalish too, black scales.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I do think I know what creature he's describing. There is, for those of you who have watched all the series that we've been doing on Persia being the source of this Aryan race that went down, and this occult technology that the Nazis were using and all of that, the Persian word for this creature he's describing is Tufan. It was carried down through the ages, through Greek mythology and the other mythologies, as Typhon or Typhon. And it is described as a black smoke creature similar to, like, in that TV series Lost, but it manifests into exactly what he's describing. A two-tailed serpent with a humanoid-type body on top. But anyway, this black smoke creature, Tufan, is where we get the word typhoon from, like when Jesus rebuked the storm and that sentient atmosphere obeyed him and stopped. And it's also where we get the word typhoid, like typhoid fever, that this spirit causes illness. For example, this would be one piece of ancient art showing this type of creature. So this is interesting. Typhon was said to be the son of Tartarus and the father of the Hydra. So for those of you who put the puzzle pieces together from the ancient texts and have watched the Hail Hydra series and the Hydra DNA used in these injections and all of that, I think this might be interesting. And this is a depiction of his wife, also having the two serpent tails as legs. So you can take it or leave it. I know that some people won't want to hear about this type of mythology in a video like this, but in the sense that this interview is intended to point out that there is a correlation between demonic, what the ancient texts call demonic entities, and what we are now calling these energy parasites, spiritual parasites, things like that. I just thought it was important to point out, while this gentleman describes this demonic entity manifesting in his room, that there is in mythology an entity recorded exactly like that, a black smoke demon that has these two snake legs.
And then I see this kind of a portal open up, like an oval-shaped dark portal. It was pitch black, but it was in the middle of the cloud, and the clouds were kind of coming out of it, and the cloud and fog were around it. I'm looking at this dark portal. I can't see anything. Then all of a sudden, I see swoosh, this snake-like tail or movement moving from bottom up within the portal. And it looked like it was connected, like it was either two snake tails or a snake-like body that had two vertebrae in it, like parallel tails adjacent to each other. And it went up, and it was kind of grayish on the bottom, and it had kind of black, and it was scalish too, black scales. And I remember saying to myself, what is that? So the fog is filling up more out of this, coming out of this portal. I saw the snake-like movements, and then I see these serpentine movements within the clouds, almost like something's coming out of that portal and it's filling up the room. And then all of a sudden, this face goes across my field of vision from left to right. And it was basically from the side, it looked kind of like dog or lion-like. And the rest of his body was the serpentine tail.
Don't you have a drawing or picture of that thing?
Yeah, actually, I'll get to that a little bit later. So it came into the room from left to right, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, boy, if I'm hallucinating, this is really weird. Because, I mean, I didn't have any fear of snakes or anything. One of my college roommates had a boa constrictor, and I used to hold it all the time, no problem. So it wasn't some underlying fear that was coming up. So then the face turns towards me, and it looked like almost like a disabled cat or mangy lion that had been through a few fights. I remember its left eye looked like it was slightly damaged. It might even look like it was blind in its left eye. I couldn't really tell. I kept thinking, okay, is this a hallucination or is this thing really in my room? What is going on here? And all of a sudden, the face changes into the most horrible thing that I could possibly imagine. It became very ghoulish-like, hobgoblin-like, and it came down towards me from the ceiling, opening its mouth almost like to devour me. I was terrified. I mean,
well, that's very interesting. I tell you why, because there was I used to know this person who was a psychic basically, and he described that type of beings that used to affect. He used to see that being lingering above people that were either demonically possessed or victims of black magic. He used to see that.
And the Bible says that, resist them and they will flee. But it also says, very dangerous, because it says after they've left, that they will go and get 7 spirits more wicked or more powerful, stronger than they are, and come back and try to get in that same body.
Well, I've seen two things like that. Is one, if we get rid of the voices and the patient does not get onto a positive spiritual path and stay there, if they just go back out and try to live their lives as they have, that actually happens. The voices not only will come back, but they'll come back with reinforcements, and it'll be much worse.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you clean house, you better replace it with something positive. These things will come back. They're like sharks. You know, they can smell negative emotional energy in the environment, just like a shark can smell blood, and they're attracted to it. And then when they find somebody who's, you know, psychiatrically upset or suffering or gone through horrendous sexual abuse or physical abuse or you know, traumas, all kinds of, they seek out people with trauma, because then they can just go in there and they can tweak them, and they get a massive flow of negative emotional energy. So that's one of the things they want to do. They want to create negative emotional energy. So they throw thoughts into the client's thought stream that will trigger that. And since they're energetic, you know, they don't exist in physical reality. Thoughts are energetic. They don't exist in physical reality either. Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's brain. Nobody's ever put a thought in a bottle. They are energetic entities. They're energy.
And I think that word entity is important, because they do have intelligence. They do make decisions. I mean, I have heard testimonies of almost like just a redundant, like an AI repeating thing that somebody will hear, that they don't seem to interact, but largely, especially when talking about schizophrenics, they do. These entities are intelligent and conniving and diabolical.
Oh yeah. Yeah, big time. Some of them are so diabolical, I can't believe it. Very sly, very slick. And some of them are very dumb. Some of them just go, hey, 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 you know, just to irritate the guy.
Yeah, right.
You know, stuff like that. So there's a whole range of intelligences with them. But all of that is turned, that the main purpose is to generate that negative emotional energy. And since thoughts are energetic, and these entities are energetic, they can go into the mind of a schizophrenic and they can pull up all the rotten things that ever happened to him, all the rotten things he ever did, and they can throw it into their thought stream and bring it to their attention. You know, look at this. See this? You're stupid. You're ugly. You're dangerous. You're, you know, and generate that negative emotional energy, and then they suck it off. So that was another thing I saw, is after the voices attacked the schizophrenics, they were completely drained. They didn't have any energy left. And that happened with all of them.
Yeah. What do you think about this, Jerry? I've seen this dynamic in relationships. And of course, I'm looking at this from a spiritual perspective largely, and technological perspective. But right now in the spiritual, in relationships, I've seen these entities move between, in my own relationship. My ex was in this, not only does he have a degree in psychology and stuff, but he himself checked himself into the psych ward multiple times because he dealt with that. He's just a tortured soul. He wouldn't admit schizophrenia, I'm not sure, and I don't want to get too personal about it. But what I did see, and this is to my own, this happened to me living with him, that these things that would torment him like that, like you said, they would bring up every little thing that he ever did wrong in his own mind.
Yeah.
Like they were torturing him constantly. And
Yep.
in his sleep, he would, these, shadow people would
nightmares.
hold, like sleep paralysis. He would scream and they would hold him down and all this. And so he was being tortured by these things, but I could feel them when he would get relief, when he would use these techniques, the positive thinking. He didn't ever get saved and go the biblical route, but he did try some, positive music and different things. And when he could push them out, they would come to me and say those same things about him to try to get me to pick a fight with him.
Oh, isn't that interesting? I've heard something like that before.
They would, oh, you did always do this. Oh, you always. So the same things that he was saying in his head, they were trying to get me to
reinforce.
Say them, to say them to him for them,
Right.
If he could push them out of him, they would come to me.
Yeah, they want that energy. That's all they want, is that negative emotional energy. And it's got to be negative. They have to turn it negative before they can take it. And I have freaking no idea how they suck it out of people, and none. I mean, I've had patients tell me I can feel it leaving. I know when they're doing it. I can feel the energy leaving my body, and I don't know how they do it. They just do it. But they have to turn. See, they can't make their own energy.
Right.
They're parasites.
Correct.
They have to take it from us, and they get everybody. They don't just get schizophrenics. It's a continuum. They hit everybody.
Yeah, it's a constant battle for all of humanity. The sad part is that most people don't know they're in a battle. They're just like,
and the voices don't want them to know.
Of depression. Give me some more, my duffel bag full of meds.
Yeah, that's the last thing the voices want the victim to know. That they're in a battle. They want them to think that these are their thoughts.
Now, this is interesting, though. One of the patterns that you mentioned that I had seen in a previous interview, that, again, which is almost like this disembodied thing, this transmigration of these parasites moving from one person to another, that you said some of the voices had told people things that were verifiable, like they knew things about their family, or one instance you said something along the lines of, they had told one of them to go to a specific location, wait on the corner, and a drug dealer and meet them there.
Yep, that was quite common. That was quite common.
They were,
but if you look at it, it's all negative stuff. Like, oh, this is where you get drugs. This is where you get alcohol. This is the house you can rob. This is where the loot is kept. It's all stuff. Now the prisoner thought he was in heaven. Here's this, this whatever it was, telling him where the drugs were, where to find them, which houses to rob, when the people were up, where to hide from the cops. For them, that's like, they're happy as pigs in a trough.
But that's great evidence, though, because a lot of the things that you had talked about, they were verifiable, that these voices in their head weren't just nonsensical. They really did go there and find what they were told was there, or they really did know things about different people that there's no way they could have known.
Yeah, the oddest one, and I've spoke about this in my other interviews also, was this was the most interesting one. And this guy fully recovered. I mean, he he got rid of the voices. He was telling me these stories after he recovered. But there was this one fella, he was on the prison unit. He joined one of our groups. He was kind of mousy. He was very shy and quiet, which is unusual for prisoners. So he came to the group, and I got in and got talking to him, and he said he was hearing voices, and so I'm like, oh, great, here's another one. So I started working with him, and he told me one time that, you know, he was full of drugs. He's got a long criminal record as long as your arm. He was using cocaine. He was using speed. You know, been in jail and prison a bunch of times, but he was out, and the voices told him, take all the money you have, which is like $250, and I don't know how long ago this was. It was, you know, 40, 50 years ago. And they said, we know where there's a sesame oil pop field in Oregon, and this guy's in San Diego.
Mhm.
So he trusted his voices so much about, you know, them telling him what to do, that, you know, they said, go get 2 burlap sacks and a machete, and take your $250, and I'll show you where this pot field is. So he drove from San Diego all the way up to Oregon, following, you know, like a GPS. The voices were telling him where to go. So he ends up in strange territory on a dirt road, and finally the dirt road ends at the base of a mountain. And he asked the voices, he said, okay, what now? And they said, there's a hiking trail off to your left, and get your machete and follow that hiking trail. They said, in a few miles you'll hit the sesame oil field. So he did. And here's this giant sesame oil field in the middle of this big forest, and he cuts down a bunch of marijuana, and he fills up the 2 burlap sacks, and he goes, well, what now? And the voices tell him, well, we know where there's a park that you can sell it. So he went to that park, and he's selling all this marijuana, and he's making a fortune. And he's buying all the prostitutes he can handle. He's buying all the liquor he wants. He's buying all the cocaine he wants. And then the voices wanted to go fishing. And I'm telling them, what? You're kidding me. You're shitting me. He goes, no, they wanted to go fishing. I said, the voices wanted to go fishing. He goes, yeah, they were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. So I'm like, what are they dead people or what? You know, I didn't know. Why would they want to go fishing? So he said they went fishing. He got himself a fishing rod. He got himself all the stuff he needed. He went out to the Columbia River, and he said he was the only one catching anything that day. He said the voices would tell him where to throw the hook, how long to be there, and when to move after whatever hole was filled up. And he was just catching fish left and right. And everybody else was looking at him like, what's going on? You know, so he did that for like 2 weeks, you know, with catching fish, drinking, drugging, you know, prostitutes, just having the life of Riley. And he ran out of money, and he goes, okay, I need to go get some more marijuana. And the voices said, no, you can't go up there, waiting on you now. You know, they know somebody's stealing their stuff. They're waiting on you. They're watching that field. You go up there, they're going to kill you. So the voices told him, you know, take whatever money you got and go back to San Diego where you came from. And he did.
So verifiable. But see, that's talking about how diabolical they are. I've done several testimonies. I have another YouTube channel page that's still up, thankfully. Testimonies of people who got free from all these different types of spirits, these different, you know, parasitic entities. And in the New Age movement, I hear that again and again, that these tribunals of these parasitic entities they call them spirit guides, right? They'll come really sneaky, diabolical, and they'll tell these people stuff like that, how to succeed at this, how to succeed at that, where the open doors are to, you know, your life is going to be so easy and stuff. And then as soon as that person starts to, like the testimonies I usually deal with are, they start to read the Bible. They get through the New Age stuff, and they're interested. And as soon as they start to study the Bible or Jesus, then these things turn on them. Here they've thought that they were their friends the whole time. Yeah. And then at that one, like you said, there's that one trigger, and they'll even have like, you know, the paranormal activity, what is it called? Poltergeist activity, like stuff stuff happening in their homes and flying across rooms, and, you know, just a crazy response. After all of this time, they've lived with these voices, these spirit guides that didn't turn on them until that point.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder, why would a hallucination do something like that? You know, so there's patterns. So you know, they get louder after sunset. They get louder when they're ignored. So psychiatry will tell these people, you know, they'll say, well, I'm hearing voices, I'm hearing voices. And they'll go, take your meds and ignore them. You can't ignore them. They get louder. And that's consistent. It's another pattern. They foster self-destructive behavior. Look at how many times a schizophrenic sabotages himself from succeeding at anything. You know, look at their suicide rate. It's 3 to 5 times as high as the normal population. You know, they are the voices are very destructive. You know, but what's interesting is that the suicide rate of psychiatrists is also 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. It's almost exactly the same.
I was going to ask you, when we started this interview and you were talking about, you know, just your caseload and stuff. I mean, the amount of mental fortitude that you would have to see people on a daily basis whose lives are that much in shambles because of these things, and then be told by your profession that, well, there's really nothing you can do. There's no cure. These people are, you know, they're going to be in a mental institution, or they're going to be in a cage, or they're going to be, you know, how did you deal with that? That's what I mean. What sparked in you, I just wonder, that would make you think maybe they can be helped?
Well, I think that goes all the way back to my childhood with my dad. I never did trust authority. I mean, that was beaten into me. So I was always leery, you know, and then in the Boy Scouts, you know, I was approaching the star rank, and you had to memorize the Morse code. And I did everything I needed to do. I mean, it wasn't like today. I mean, they made it hard back then. So I memorized the Morse code. I did all the stuff I was supposed to do, and I turned it in. And my scoutmaster said, well, I can't approve you for the star rank. And I said, why not? I did everything. And he said, well, your dad contacted me. You're not very reverent. You don't go to church. And I'm like, my dad told you that? He never went to church either. You know, so I'm like, what the hell's going on here? So it was like a conspiracy. And so I said, okay, how long do I have to go to church? And he said 6 months. So I went to the nearest church I could walk to. I went there 6 months. I saw that the preacher was having an affair with one of his, you know, parishioners. I kept my mouth shut. You know, we built what do you call it? One of those temple things, and read some Bible stories. And yeah, I didn't get a whole lot out of it. I really didn't want to be there. And I finished up, and I got the note from the preacher. You know, okay, I did my 6 months. I gave it to the scoutmaster. And he looks at it, and he calls the preacher, and the preacher said, yeah, he was there. He came every time for 6 months. And he said, but he didn't set the house on fire. He just, you know, he was there. And so the scoutmaster, I go back and I said, okay, you talked to him, right? I was there. I kept my part of the bargain. And he goes, well, no, I'm not going to give it to you because you're still not reverent enough. He said you weren't paying attention. And I said, screw you. I said, we had a deal and you broke it. I said, I'm done with Scouts. I'm done with you, and I'm not going back again. I'm quitting the troop. You know, this is duplicity and fraud as far as I'm concerned. And what kind of leader does that kind of stuff? You know, so I quit. Yeah, I quit. That was blow number, you know, I don't know how many blows it was. And then there was, you know, after that, I thought, well, college professors, they're like the cream of the crop. They are superhuman. So,
I think that's what we all thought. Oh,
yeah, these guys are gods, you know, kind of thing. And so here I am. What I hated about psychology is that you couldn't verify freaking anything except in experimental psychology, where you had a lab where you can go in there and you could actually see it for yourself. But all the rest, you had to trust these people to be telling you the freaking truth. That wasn't very true. So I'd hear things, you know, from time to time, and I'm going, well, that sounds odd. That doesn't seem right, but there's no way to prove it. You know, it's like you guys suck this shit up, and you regurgitate it on your test, and this is the truth. And I'm looking
That's
at
exactly the indoctrination. It's like you memorize it and you tell us that you you have memorized it, and then you're done. It's indoctrination. I was the same way in college. I'm like, but and we have a discussion. I would like to know about this. They're
no,
like,
there's no discussion. And the higher you got, the less welcome a discussion was. You know, so you could have a discussion in undergraduate a lot easier than masters, and then in the PhD program it was like, no, you don't ask us any questions, you don't challenge us, you do what we say, you do it when we say, and you jump when we say. And I'm going, I do? You know, it's like, no I don't. You know, so I was in trouble there all the time.
But that's, I mean, now you can see that's the people who quote unquote succeed are the ones who succeed, and the ones who get the grants and all of that. They're the ones who are not free thinkers. They're the ones who will do what they've been told.
Yeah.
So we're under this entire, you know, it's pseudoscience, and all they say is
80% of what psychologists publish is not replicable. That means 80% of it is bullshit. 80%.
Yeah.
You know, and no spiritual anything. You know, there was in 8 years of higher education, masters and PhD, there was no mention of spirit at all. There was no mention of people being spiritual beings or energetic units. No, everything was the mind, and they don't even get that right. You know, so that, you know, they have no cures. Psychiatry has no cures for any of those 275 mental illnesses they dreamt up. All they do is just drug the brain, and it cures absolutely nothing.
Which I think is why now the pendulum has swung. For so many years, like when we were coming up, we just took it for granted, like that they're right. You know, I never questioned it. But now it's swung to the absurd, to where people they're starting to we're having a great awakening at the same time as the world's going to hell. We're, you know, on the other side, people are like, hey, I got free, I got cured, I got this. And, you know, not just by spiritual means, but all of these other natural means, you know, that there are different medications that come from plants and different stuff that are highly effective things. And so people are out there, they're like, what? Like, I'm done with mainstream medicine.
Well, you know, they have a fella in Australia who had nothing to do with psychology. He never took even one psychology course. He was a merchant marine ship captain, and he was brilliant. And he, you know, on all those voyages out at sea, he was always reading, always studying. He was always checking about the human condition. And he came up with a conception of the mind that actually works. And you can go in there and you can remove traumas. It's called the Mace method. And they took this method and they demonstrated it to one of the big universities in Australia. And they showed them that it worked. And they wanted to take it from them. Otherwise, they didn't want anything to do with it. You know?
So can you say the name of that method again? Because you kind of glitched out a little, and I want everybody to hear it. What's it called again? The what method?
It's called the Mace Energy Method, and it's from John Mace. He's wrote 2 books about it, and the books are CAUSISM, CAUSISM, which means they're getting at the cause of the mental illness and not the symptoms. They're not paying attention to this. They're getting right to the root cause, which is frozen energy ridges that he talks about. So he talks about what happens when the human being encounters a trauma. That gets pushed down, and some decisions are made very quickly about, what did I do to get into this trauma? What did I do how do I get out of it? Who am I in relation to this trauma? And then that stuff gets buried because it's so painful. But it takes energy to bury it, you know, and to keep it buried, it takes energy. So it takes energy from the spiritual being. You start releasing that stuff, that energy returns to the individual, and those issues aren't as psychologically charged. They don't cause a reaction, they cause a response. And this exists right now, and the mainstream wants absolutely nothing to do with it.
See, I would disagree that they don't want anything to do with it. I believe they know all about it and they suppress it, because we've seen during the congressional hearings with the MK Ultra programs, both in Canada and here and all around the world, that they use trauma-based mind control. So they know
Yeah,
about these trauma.
they know about it.
They know about it. So
Yep.
it's not that they don't want anything to do with it. They don't want us to get healed from it, because now we're in mass. We're being traumatized on
Yeah,
a continual
in mass.
basis in mass.
Right.
And they don't want us to get free. And
They-
you
no,
know,
they
it
don't.
reminds me of Russ Dizdar. Have you ever heard of Russ Dizdar?
Uh-uh.
He was a pastor, but he worked with these exact type of entities, and with MPD, or now I guess they call it DID. And he had found that working with that at a certain time, I forget when he says, like it started in the 60s or 70s, that the mental institutions started being flooded with, you know, it used to be really rare having multiple personality disorder or, you know, DID. And he did like you did. He listened to them about, you know, who were these real personalities? How did they get in there? What trauma was associated with them and all of that? And could he heal them and bring them back from this broken state? And yeah, when he listened to them, he found out that yes, a lot of these people, it was done intentionally. A lot of them, you know, not also, like you said, sexual abuse traumas and, you know, other traumas. But that's exactly what he found, was this, what you're talking about right here. And he didn't call it that, but that was the procedure that he used to heal these fractured people, and that they could recover from these traumas.
Yeah, and you can recover from schizophrenia, but they don't want you to. They don't want you to know you can, and they don't want you to know the methods by which you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had a number of people recover. You know, they have to work. I mean, it's not easy, but you know, I might be able to bring one of them on later. Well, matter of fact, I know I can bring one on later. I know one who will talk to you.
That would be fantastic. And you sent me the literature, and I'll also put your book cover and information on there too. I'll put it all in the description box of the podcast and the different platforms when I air this, so that information can get out to people. Hey, speaking of that, because I want to talk about my deliverance from some of these. So let's get into that supernatural experience that you had you were in was it the penitentiary? I think you were working with prisoners then. And this one gentleman, you'd been working with him for a while, and he told you had made the voices so angry that they were like going to get you. And then in your office, and this was the first time you said that you had never had a quote unquote like supernatural experience with one of these entities, but you said, just tell us the story and what you saw happen. Oh, sorry, I knocked my computer back. And what you saw actually happen in your office.
Well, there was a progression to that. So, you know, the voices are running these patterns, and let me quickly go through them because they're the same for virtually all. So if they're running patterns, they're not hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run these patterns, and you can see for yourself. You talk to a schizophrenic, he'll be running these patterns. So they foster isolation. They want the person away from everybody. They want them alone. They want them in their room. They don't want any interference with the bullcrap they're feeding them. They demand the attention of their victims. It's a constant fight for the attention of the victim. They maneuver for increased control over the victim constantly. They'll gaslight them. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They demand the victim not tell anybody about their presence. What's interesting is, for the most part, they're stunned by the snap of a rubber band. So if you put a rubber band around your wrist and you snap it, that seems to shock them.
Huh.
And they shut up for a short while, just long enough to get the person to repeat the 23rd Psalm, which they hate with a passion. The voices are consummate liars. You can't be trusted to keep any bargain or tell the truth about any. You can't trust them. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's important to know, because anything they tell you is likely to be a lie. They get louder when they're ignored. They constantly steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They can manipulate feeling without speaking, and they short-circuit reason. They pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. They thrive in boredom. They will cause selective forgetting, and they will fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves and others. They destroy any positive self-concept the person has. They'll attempt to pull the victim away from consensual reality, which is the reality we walk around in most of the time. Voices, they use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions, kind of like a hypnotist almost. They're averse to anything positive or beautiful. Any attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that the voices are energetic parasites, draining them will trigger a volatile reaction consistently. Okay, so those are the patterns. And you can see these for yourself. Don't believe me, go talk to a schizophrenic and ask him, hey man, are the voices doing this to you? And they'll tell you, you know. So what I did is I started interfering with these patterns. You know, and the big one was the lies, because they were always telling these patient lies. and you know, I'm like, why do you listen to them? You know they're liars. They lie to you all the time. You know, why do you even listen to them? Why do you believe them? Every time you listen to them, you got into trouble. Why do you even pay attention to them? You know, oh, because they're so damn real. You know. So I started interfering with these patterns, starting with the most prominent all the way down. And then I started getting reports from the patients I was working with in the prison that the voices were getting pissed at me because they didn't like what I was doing. And they didn't like the patients following through with the homework and doing stuff to interfere with them. So here I started getting all these reports like, hey, the voices are really getting pissed with you, you know, and I'm like, what? Why? So it went from there to the next step was one patient, as he's leaving my office, he stops in the doorway and he turns around and he says, you know what you're doing is very dangerous, don't you? And I looked at him like, what do you mean? You know, I was like, I just staring at him like, what? No, I don't know what it's dangerous. Why do you even say that? And then he turns around and leaves. And I'm sitting there going, why do you say that? And you know, it didn't even cross my mind that he might do something to me. That didn't even cross my mind. But you know, I got that, and then that same guy comes back maybe 2 weeks later. He's still working on stuff. He's still making progress, and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? And he goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. He comes to my office without an appointment, the psych office. So, well, come on in, tell me what they have to say. And that never happened before. It was always the patient would tell me what they were saying. And I would tell the patient, well, tell them to go stick their heads in a toilet or something. You know, it was like, you know, that kind of stuff. But, you know, we sat down and I'm looking at him like, okay, tell me. What do they want to tell me? And he goes, this is what they want to tell you. And these words came out of his mouth. It said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm looking at him like, do. It's like Twilight Zone. And
did it sound like his voice? It didn't, or did his voice change at all?
It was like his voice, but it changed tone just a little bit. Mm-hmm. You know, just barely noticeable. I'm looking at him, I'm stunned. And he goes, that wasn't me, that was them. You know, and, you know, I had some, you know, I wasn't thinking straight. I was like, you know, it kind of blew my mind. And he's saying, that wasn't me, that was them. I'm just telling you what they were saying, it wasn't me. And I'm looking at him and I sensed he was telling the truth. And, you know, I'm blown away. I'm stunned. And I don't know I don't even remember what I said back to him. But after he left, I just sat there staring into space. That's when my whole denial system just collapsed right then. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was tattered. It was beat up. I had a lot of evidence that these things weren't separate. You know, they were separate entities, but I didn't want to believe it. I just didn't want to believe it. And this did it. You know, after that, it was like, okay, they are separate entities. They're not some figment of his imagination. They're not the subconscious. This is a separate entity. This is a separate identity. This is something individual, separate from the person who was talking to me. And I just closed my office and stared out the window for the rest of the day. You know, it was like, you know, what the hell am I getting myself into? What is going on here? But I didn't stop working with these guys. I mean, I just kind of shook it off. And then about 2 to 3 weeks later with this same guy, here I'm reading this book, Miguel Ruiz's, he's a shaman. It was The Voice of Knowledge. And in there, they were talking about parasitic entities. And that's one of the things I suspected these things were, because all the patients were telling me when they hit, they drain my energy. It's gone. You know, it's consistent. There's a one-to-one correlation between the appearance of the voices and the draining of their energy. And some of them were so drained at the end of the night, they couldn't even get out of bed. They couldn't even get up to eat breakfast. So it was a major drain. And I had, for years, I didn't know what was causing that. I thought it was the anxiety of listening to these things, but it turned out that wasn't it at all. That broke too later on. But I kept working with this guy. He started getting better and better. The voices started getting less and less. They came less often. They weren't as strong. And I'd read this about there being parasitic entities. So I brought that book into the prison, and I said, you know, I've been wondering about this, to the same guy. And I said, I want to read it to you and tell me what you think about what this guy's saying. So I started reading, and as soon as I hit the part where they were parasitic entities, this guy goes into a zombie stare. You know, he's just staring at me. He's sitting there silently, just staring at me with this blank stare. And I'm looking at him like, what's going on? And, you know, I'm just staring at him. He's staring at me. And then all of a sudden, from behind my head is this loud crackling, like a arc welder. It was like
exactly what you're
crackle, 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 crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the hell? And I turn around and I see nothing. And I look at him and he's just staring at me like a zombie. And this thing starts moving to my right, to the wall, my office wall to the right, and then starts moving at a 45-degree angle up toward the opposite end of the office, up toward the ceiling. And I can't see anything. I can't smell anything. It sounded just like my arc welder, you know, crack, 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 all the way up the wall. You could hear it moving. And I'm looking at him and he's just staring at me. And I'm like, something's wrong. Something's wrong. So I pushed my chair against the wall because all they had in the psych office, the medical unit, was a female guard. You know, you know, that wouldn't have done any good. You're basically on your own. So, you know, I pushed my chair against the office wall. And in case this guy came at me, at least I could kick him back and I wouldn't go scooting across the, you know, the room and falling over. So I got in a position where I could defend myself. And he's staring at me. And I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he's just staring at me. He doesn't say anything. It's like he's frozen in time. And he's just got this blank stare as this thing is crackling. And then it's, you know, I didn't want to take my eyes off him very long, but I'm looking where this noise is. And finally it starts crossing the office wall, the back office wall up near the ceiling, and it's crackling all along. So I could see him and I could hear where the crackling's coming from at the same time. So I'm looking at it. I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I don't feel anything. It just shouldn't be. This doesn't happen. This stuff just doesn't happen, and it's moving. So he's staring at me the whole time, and then it starts coming down the left wall, and it's moving toward me, and I'm like, what's happening here? And I'm darting my attention between him and this noise, and then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right at my left leg. So I look down in there, and it's empty. It's totally empty, and this thing's crackling in there for a few seconds, and it had been cleaned by the inmate porter the night before. There's nothing in there. And then it stops.
And you never saw any sparks or anything. It was
Nope,
just the
nope,
the
saw
noise, but you
nothing.
could, yeah, you could
Saw
pinpoint.
nothing, no feel anything. I didn't see anything. Oh, I heard it. And then he gets up very slowly and he goes, I gotta leave. And he shuffles out. And I'm like, yeah, get the hell out of here. Go. Go, go. I couldn't get him out of there fast enough. And I was totally relieved after he left. And I'm like scared shitless. I'm like, what the hell just happened? So I go out in the hallway and I'm checking all the office doors. You know, after I traced back the pattern of the crackling to see if the office was burned or there was any burn marks or anything. No, there was nothing. Nothing. You couldn't tell anything had ever happened. And so I go check all the office doors. I go check the doctor door across from me. I go check the nurses' doors. They're all locked. You know, I was the only one in the medical unit at that time, except for the guard, you know, at the front. And I was so bent out of shape that, again, I locked up my office, I canceled all my appointments, and I stared out the window for the rest of the day and kind of went, what am I getting into? What just happened? You know, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it. You know, I couldn't even talk to my wife about it because she didn't like me messing with these guys in the first place. So there was nobody to talk to. You know, the only person I could talk to is this guy, you know, who understood them. But you know, I was so bent out of shape that I didn't call that guy back for probably 3 months.
Oh
You
my
know,
goodness.
I didn't want to see him. And then finally,
Imagine.
my curiosity got the best of me. And I finally put out a pass for him to be brought to the psych office. Probably 3 months later, he shows up and he's looking good. I figured he'd be a wreck. You know, I figured he'd be an absolute wreck. If whatever this was came out of him, it was strong enough to cause whatever it, you know, this crackling. But, you know, if it could affect physical reality like that, it had to be strong. But, you know, he comes in, he's walking, he's looking good. He's got good energy. You know, and I'm like, why isn't he a wreck? So I thought, well, I said, what? You look good. What's going on? He goes, well, I've been practicing the stuff you told me, and I'm able to keep them under control, but you know, I haven't beat them yet. So we did some small talk, and finally I said, yeah, you remember the last time you were in the office here? I said, did you hear that crackling that moved around the office? And he goes, yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised you did. And
Yeah.
I said, what the hell was that? And he said, that was them. And I said, them who? He said, that was the voices. And I said, well, what the hell were they doing? He said, they were trying to scare you. I said, well, they did one hell of a job of it. And I said, you know, I said, you had this strange look on your face as you left my office. You looked like a zombie. And I said, what were you thinking? What were the voices telling you at that time? And he looked at me, you know, calm as anything. And he goes, well, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your belly. The shank is a homemade prison knife.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, I'm like, whoa, you know, that's what he meant by what you're doing is dangerous.
Wow.
And then I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you do it? You know, I'm thinking, well, I worked with him for 6 months. We know each other really well. I've watched out for him. He's told me a bunch of stuff. You know, he's not going to do something like that. And I asked him, well, just out of curiosity, I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he looks me straight in the eye very calmly, and he says, I couldn't find one. And then he turns around and walks away. I'm like sitting there going, what in the hell am I getting myself into here? You know, I was stunned. And there was nobody to talk to, nobody. You know, I couldn't go to the chief psychologist and say, hey, man, I was talking to a schizophrenic and the office walls started crackling. You know, yeah, I'd end up in one of the cells myself.
So how long was it before you started talking openly about this? Were you already retired when you finally started to open up?
Well, no. What Robert Stanley, I don't know how he got wind of me. maybe something I wrote. I don't remember. But he calls me up and he goes, I want to do a podcast with you on my show. And I said, I'm still working. And he goes, well, I'll make up a alias for you. And I said, okay, no videotaping, alias, just my voice. And he goes, yeah, that's what we'll do. And so it's okay. I'll do that because I know they'd fire me. I mean, I have no idea they'd go after me, no doubt. And so he put it out there. I didn't come out with anything until I had retired. Other than that, and then other people started asking me to talk, and I did so as long as who I wasn't exposed, because they would go after you. I have no doubt that they would go after me. None.
Yeah,
So,
well, we're seeing that now with the medical community, like we were talking about going after people's licenses and stuff. There's absolutely no doubt. But thank you for coming out and sharing all of this now for everybody. I mean, it's so rare to find anybody brave enough to challenge the system or to come out and say, especially talking about something supernatural like this, that you had a disembodied encounter with one of these energy entities. I mean, that's, for somebody to say that, it takes bravery. It really does. So I appreciate it.
oh well, it's been quite a trip. It's been one hell of a trip. It's and then when we got to the point where we could get rid of these things, I mean, that it was absolutely amazing. That you can get rid of them but what psychiatry is doing, it's like, okay, you get a magnet, you get those iron filings, and it's you see the outline of the energy, and then they get drugs and they pour it on there, and they're trying to drug an energetic field. It just doesn't work. The voices are of an entirely different universe. They're of the energy universe. There is no time, there is no space, there is no matter there. That's why they can go into the person's mind and pull whatever memories they have and bring them to their awareness, because thoughts are energetic, these voices are energetic. They play by a whole different set of rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion and many other people's at this point that the people at the at the highest tiers, they of course do know, like we said, the MK Ultra levels, the Black Ops levels of the military and stuff. They do know, and they want us to be avatars, to be hosts for these parasites. They don't want. It's almost like we've been turned over to them. But I think down, like you said, all of your peers and entrenched contemporaries and stuff, I don't think they're aware. I don't think everybody's aware of it. I think it's so compartmentalized, like you said. At the regular people levels, they're just following the textbook,
Well, let's look at it at the macroscopic level. These patterns that the voices are telling schizophrenics are identical to what the deep state, mainstream media, psychiatric mafia, Biden and all the rest of them are telling them. Look at it. Negativity, anti-religious. They stop people from going to churches. They in Canada, they tried to arrest one of the preachers. They foster negative emotion. Turn on the television. You don't have enough negative emotion, it'll pour out of there for you. They drain their victims. You're constantly bombarded with this negative bull crap. You can't ignore them. They get louder when they're ignored. They foster self-destructive behavior. Look at what they're doing. Lock yourself up. Stay away from your family. Stay away from your friends. Isolate yourself.
It's exactly, I said that
exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
Went live to the masses. They put us, isolate you from your friends and family. Then they bombard you with all the, like you said, the guy who he was just staying drunk and drugging and fishing and stuff. Like, that's what alcoholism went through the roof during the isolation. They're constantly pumping perversion into us, every way they can. And what do we have? We have an epidemic of chronic fatigue. They're like, oh, it's COVID. We have an epidemic of depression, an epidemic of suicide. All of these things that you say these entities are pushing on the patients that you dealt with, now it's live to the masses.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's on a
look how many people-
macroscopic scale.
it's terrifying. I mean, hopefully people will, well, like I said, we are experiencing an awakening. Speaking of that, I want to tell my story. This is what, when I heard your story, it was so, talking about the crackling and the electricity. It was exactly, you were the only person at that point that I had ever heard tell exactly what happened to me alone in my home when I got saved. And so as far as this is my take on getting rid of these things permanently, that I was home alone in my house and I was tormented. This was 25 years, more than 25 years ago. And I was in a really self-destructive lifestyle. I was bartending and partying all the time, and I was just miserable. And my family was just being attacked, like not my personal family, like me and my husband, you know, that thing, but like my brothers, my parents, like it was just like a full-on spiritual battle. It was so painful.
That's what it is.
You know, yeah, I'm not going to go into like all the details, but it was destroying everything.
Yep.
But it came to a point where I had my coming to Jesus meeting, I call it. I was alone in my home. I wasn't in a church, and I was crying. I was pacing through the house, just kind of shaking my fist at God. You know, if you loved people, why would you let this happen? Why, you know, my parents are good people. Why won't you help them? And what, you know, and I was just really giving it to him. And after I got done throwing my tantrum and I got all of that out, you know, then I just fell to my knees. I was exhausted. Like I had thrown my tantrum like a little kid and it was over. And I fell down to my knees and I was crying. And from the most sincere place in my heart, I just said, God, save me. Like, I can't get free from this. I need help. Like, you've got to intervene. Save me. I surrender. What do you want from me? I'll do it. I'll do it. Whatever you want. And it was like there was a spiritual battle in the atmosphere, and it was exactly what you described. It sounded like crackling leaves, like rustling leaves in the wind, and like static electricity. Kind of, it was, you know, like a weird sound I couldn't put my fingers on. But at the same time that was going on, there was this like sound of rushing wind. It was like there was a battle between this electricity and this wind, and it was so loud, Jerry. I was scared. I went out. It was so loud. I went out on the front porch to see if like cars were pulled over or if anybody outside, if I could hear it outside. Like it was so loud. It was real, and it was electricity, and it was crackling, and you know. And I stepped back in off the porch and I shut the front door and I said, Jesus, is that you? And the instant that I said Jesus, it was gone. Like when I said that name, I mean, like a light switch. Here it was going on, and it was so loud, and the crackling and the electricity. And then the instant I said Jesus, I mean, it was almost like that exorcism movie where they say that they heard the lightning clap or the thunder clap. It was like that sudden, and it was gone. Like that was it. And then I sat down, and I was like you know, like I was just in shock. Like nobody's gonna believe this. I wasn't religious. I never went to church. I didn't know anything like this was real. I never heard of anything like this. And I found out after I got saved. I went to church, neither did they. You know, I went to church and they're like, no, that doesn't happen. There's no real, like none of that's real. We're just gonna go eat some fried chicken. And I'm like, what? Like this really happened. I was so let down by organized religion. When that thing left me, all of the desires that were its went with it. Yeah. And like you said, I thought they were my desires.
Right.
Like I thought my taste in music, my taste in clothing, because I dressed like a hooker at the bar, you know, everybody did. And my taste in clothing, my taste in music, you know, my behavior, all of it was it. Like
Yeah.
it went with it. I didn't
Yep.
have to like religiously, like, I'm gonna be good now and I'm gonna change. No, it was gone. Like all of those desires were gone. I was shocked. I really thought they were mine. I really thought that
Yeah.
was me.
Yep.
It
So there
was
you go.
so
You've
crazy.
experienced it.
Right. And that's like, you know, for me, it's very, I know exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of people who have been delivered, truly delivered, you know, not for show, but had a
Yeah.
true deliverance, a true spiritual deliverance from these things. We know, like I said, it's real. You can be free. Like you can actually be free of these things. You know, mine wasn't schizophrenia, but it was still these spiritual parasites. They were getting the upper hand, you
Well,
know?
they hit us all. I mean, who hasn't had a, you know, you're walking along the sidewalk, minding your own business, and all of a sudden this horrible thought comes to mind,
Yeah.
or beat up your boss or something, you know?
But that's the problem, is a lot, like you said, a lot of people who are dealing with this stuff, they don't want to tell anybody because they don't want to get put on a bunch of meds or
Oh
put in,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
nobody will be frank that this is normal. These entities are real. We're in a spiritual battle. You know, you have to, like the Bible says, take every thought captive. It also says test the spirits to see whether they are of God. So this is part of our reality. But people, they're living through this and struggling through it. And, you know, some of their pet demons are ganging up on to where they become the pet and the demons are in charge.
You know, you don't see psychiatry or psychology asking, where do thoughts come from? They won't touch that. They won't touch it. But, you know, the crux is there. You know, everything is motivated by thought. Everything in physical reality was a thought first. Everything around you was a thought before it came into physical reality. If you want to get to the crux of things, where do thoughts come from? Now, Manuel Swedenborg answered that 700 years ago. He was a Christian mystic, and he had access to heaven and hell, and he would go and he'd spend time in heaven and he'd spend time in hell, and then he'd come back and write about it. And what happened was, you know, years ago, I was reading Swedenborg's work, and I'm reading about the evil spirits, and they were exactly the same as these voices that the schizophrenics were hearing. And then I found there was a PhD clinical psychologist called Wilson Van Dusen, who was working in a psychiatric hospital in Northern California. And he was a Swedenborgian. And after this incident with the voice saying, you have no right to interfere with our way of life, I had to find this guy. And I didn't even know if he was still alive. So I finally caught up to him. It took a while, and he was leery because nobody else had dealt with this. And I finally sent him some emails and said, listen, this is what I'm experiencing. It's very similar to what you're experiencing. And then we got to talking for almost a year. Yeah, everything is preceded by thought. All behavior is preceded by thought. You want to change behavior, you have to change the thoughts that come into, you know, your mind is your brain, not your mind. Your brain is like the CPU in a computer. You know, your body is like the keyboard, so you have the input. You know, it's the processor. It's almost like if natives saw an explorer playing a radio, and they hear this voice coming out of the radio, so they take the radio apart and they're looking for the man who's singing, and they don't see him. You know, it's like, you know, they can't see the radio waves. They can't see the electricity. That these are energetic facets of the energetic universe.
That's the analogy I always use, is the radio, that the brain is like the radio. We're receiving thoughts. Like the mainstream teaches that we only are creating the thoughts. Like it's all us. And I'm like, no,
they don't come from
thoughts.
us. You know, like you were saying, the angel and the devil on your on your two show. That's exactly what's happening. You know,
it is.
Well, I don't know exactly what happened, but the last 20 minutes or so of that interview got cut off. I don't know if Skype has a built-in 2-hour limit or something, because I recorded it right directly on the Skype recorder. I'm just not sure. But we got the crux of the interview in, and Jerry has contacted me. He does have another guest that has been through these similar experiences that we'd like to do a conference call and do another interview. And I really believe that right now is the time. That's why I'm reaching out to these different people and doing interviews now. I really believe that it is time for us to start networking together. I think most of us can agree at this point that we can just no longer put our trust in this medical establishment. We've seen they falsify the numbers, they falsify the data, they cover up deaths, they've trained the people in the medical establishments never to question their authority. Perfect timing. Look at this article right on the front page of, the news feed. This is what they're pushing and promoting. So here in the lower left, another scientific breakthrough, right? Another scientific study. Anyway, this is the perfect example of just this nonsensical science, that it's not science anymore. It is absolute propaganda. They hate us. They absolutely hate us. Okay, scientists establish link between religious fundamentalism and brain damage. What do you guys really think? How you really feel about me? Come on, then. A study published in the Journal of Neuropsychology has shown that religious fundamentalism is, in part, the result of a functional impairment in a brain region known as the prefrontal cortex. So clearly it's true what we've been talking about for the last couple hours and what Jerry said about on a macro scale, that they absolutely are. The same thing that these voices are saying in the heads of the captives who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, those same exact voices are now saying it to the masses through the mainstream media. And we want the captives set free. We are done with all of this pseudoscience that they use just to drive their agendas home. People are dying because they suppress these cures, because they suppress treatments, because they suppress the truth of the Holy God and His ability to deliver people, to set the captives free. So I'm going to close with this 60-second clip of this young man. This is somebody's son. I think it's really easy for us to talk in generalities like we have for the last couple hours, and sometimes we need reminded that these are people. These are people who are being tormented by these quote-unquote voices. So here is a clip of Kipling Kinkle, the school shooter from 1998 who murdered his parents and then went to the school with a gun. And he will spend the rest of his life in a cage. And that's not the worst of his punishment, because he has to live with what he's done. And when you hear his voice right now, some of you will hear a monster, but I hear a captive.
Why did you go to school and start shooting people?
I had to. I had no other choice. I couldn't do anything else. I had to. God damn, these voices are pulling my head. Oh my God. Left cancer. I just want to die.
I know.
Oh God. God damn, these voices are pulling my head.
All right. Yep. Sit down.